sí. Espera. Ara te la passo pel correu, val? És que és més fàcil.
I tant.
L'acabo de passar. Arriba?
No, encara no, Laura. Li has passat a la Laura o a mi?
A tu.
Està bé el correu i tot, aenamartinez@gencat.
Sí.
Ah, mira, ara estàs projectant.
Sí. Anyway, igualment continuo provant de projectar.
Sí,
A veure,
estàs
ara.
projectant, Bé, ara ho veiem, perfecte.
From the
Super.
beginning? Sorry,
Okay, thank you,
sorry for
Laura,
the
no
delay.
worries.
Technical problems. So I will go straight to the point, and I will start talking about public procurement because I consider it one of the most interesting instruments we have to promote gender equality, especially in labor market. And when it comes about social public procurement, the most important event in Europe was the approval of this directive in 2014. It was not the first one on putting in doubt the neutrality of public procurement, but is the one that gathers all the orientations of the previous directives. And it introduces four very interesting innovations. The first one is that links public procurement or the strategic use of public procurement to the objectives of the Europe 2020 strategy, which means that puts at the core of a concept of Europe, of social and economic growth, which had been already agreed. The second point is that it associates this idea with the efficient use of public funds, which means it's not only a matter of justice, but also of efficiency. It established the foundation for socially responsible public procurement, defines the main concepts, the limits, the matters it can refer to, etc. And the most important is that it requires member states to adopt their legislation in order to ensure that these concepts are implemented. And we did so in Spain in 2017 when we approved our present law on public sector contracts. Is the first one that reflects the spirit of these directives, positioning public procurement as a strategic instrument, which even 10 years after still is a quite revolutionary idea for many people working on public procurement, and something that was especially relevant from the point of view of gender perspective is that, in Spain, since 2007, we have a law on gender equality, which requires that companies with more than 50 workers have an equality plan. But the fact that that obligation was never transferred to the law on public procurement made it impossible for us to prevent the participation of those companies in public tenders. So this new law on public sector contracts finally corrects that we call that anomaly in a way, and include among the exclusion grounds the fact of not having an equality plan in the case of those companies with a legal obligation. Our law is very extensive. It's one of the most complex laws we have, with more than 300 articles. But there are three which are especially relevant. The first one is an article that establishes that all public procurement has to include social and environmental criteria transversally and in a mandatory way. But in the same article remarks that those criteria must be relevant to the purpose of the contract. And here is where we find the first difficulty, because it's not always easy to justify the relation of a social criteria with the purpose of the contract, especially when we are talking about contracts which are very far from social policies, like, for instance, the purchase of office material or photocopies or something like that. But we will see later how we try to solve it. The second one is about that obligation to have an equality plan in the case of companies with a legal obligation. And the third one is an article that established that at least one of those criteria has to be formulated as a special performance condition. If you are not familiar to that concept, again, we will see later what it means, but just in order to facilitate the understanding of this article, a special performer condition is a condition that the company awarded the contract will have to comply. Let's put the focus now on gender-sensitive procurement. Well, this concept is under a broader umbrella we can call socially responsible public procurement or social public procurement, which at the end is a tool for strengthening social policies by setting conditions or by rewarding the compliance of those conditions by contracted companies. Those conditions can refer to different objectives like fair trade, universal accessibility, job place, among others, and promoting gender equality is one of them. It is important to remark that as long as most of those criteria, those gender equality criteria, are aimed at promoting equality in the context of the own contract, within the contract itself, these clauses are not necessarily limited to contracts with a social purpose. I mean, going again to the example of the purchase of photocopies, if we try to think about gender criteria to guarantee that the final product has a gender perspective, it's really difficult. But if we think about the gender criteria to promote gender equality among the workers involved on that contract, then it makes sense. It doesn't matter if we are contracting a service, a social service, or buying photocopies. Okay. And why it is so relevant? At the beginning, I say I consider public procurement as one of the most important instruments we have, and that's mainly because of the potential of public procurement. It's calculated that every year public authorities in the European Union spend around 14% of GDP, which is around 2 trillion per year, on public procurement. If we look at the example of Barcelona City Council, which probably can be compared to any other big city in Europe, every year we execute more than 40,000 contracts, and we dedicate around 40% of our yearly budget to those contracts. And something which is interesting is that more than 70% of that budget goes straight to contracts of services and service concessions. Can you imagine why it is especially relevant, this data? No. Okay. So I will reply myself. If we compare with other type of contracts like works or supplies, these type are by far the ones concentrating the higher amount of workers. And if you remember what I said before about which is the aim of most gender equality criteria, these are the most likely areas for incorporating gender clauses and at the same time where they have the greatest impact. So, considering this context, in Barcelona, we have developed a set of 10 clauses. The majority of them are oriented to fight against the most common inequalities we find in labor market, such as the underrepresentation of women, especially in some sectors, mainly due to access and retention barriers, the instability related to temporary and part-time contracts, sexual or sexual-based harassment, the wage gap, of course, as a result of other inequalities, and finally, the vertical and horizontal segregation. That, in case you are not familiar to that concept, we talk about vertical segregation to refer the absence of women in this making decision positions, and we talk about horizontal segregation to refer the absence of women in some sectors or some categories. Like, for example, in Spain, engineering would be the case. So, well, to find against those inequalities, we could say structural inequalities, we have designed a clause which requires to small companies, those ones without legal obligations, to adopt at least one measure to promote gender equality in the context of the contract. There is another clause which requires plans or measures to support balance between personal, family, and working life, obviously farther than the legal obligations. There is a third one that requires protocols or measures to ensure employee protection against sexual and sex-based harassment. There is a fourth one that requires gender parity applied to specific categories or across the workforce as a whole. This clause is especially addressed to those sectors with a clear problem of vertical or horizontal segregation. And finally, there are two clauses that are not formulated as obligations, but that give a positive assessment to those offers that include a higher proportion of female employees. And it is useful for those sectors where there is a clear absence of women. And another one that gives a positive assessment to offers with a higher percentage of full-time contracts, which aims to fight against the precariousness of some sectors with a high tax of feminization, like, for example, clean services or care services. There is a second set of clauses that are aimed at ensuring that the gender perspective is in the service provided. It's the case of a clause that requires training in LGBTI issues to prevent and respond to possible discriminations based on these issues in municipal facilities. Another one that requires the use of inclusive language in images and all kind of materials. And finally, another one that requires gender training as the best guarantee to ensure that the final product incorporates a gender perspective. And there is a last one we consider instrumental. It's a clause that requires the collection of data disaggregated by sex. And it is instrumental in the sense that we use it to get data that we cannot get by other means. For example, about the use of our facilities that can help us to analyze, to make an analysis with gender perspective, and when necessary, to reorient our policies. Well, this first type of classification was based on the goal of the clauses, on the objective. But there is another type of classification which has to do with the mandatory level. In that sense, we can decide if we formulate a clause as a capability criterion. That means that we consider that those skills, knowledge, or experience are essential to execute the contract. It's not very common, but in some cases, gender training could be considered a capability criterion if we think that that knowledge is fundamental for a properly execute of the contract. We can decide to formulate it as a special performance condition, which I explained before, and that's a contractual requirement that must be fulfilled by the company awarded the contract. We can decide to formulate it as an award criterion, which is not an obligation, but adds value to the offer. This way of formulating, it's very useful when we aim to promote a cultural change, like, for example, the hiring of women in some sectors. And finally, we can formulate a clause like a type break criterion. They are not really effective because it's not a common situation, but in some cases, when two offers get the same score, we can apply criteria to break the tie. Like, for example, the highest percentage of women in the workforce would be a possibility. In Barcelona, we decided to simplify all those possibilities in order to be able to offer standardized models of clauses. And that's why the majority of them are formulated only as performance conditions, which is the easiest way to do it. Only those two clauses about promoting the hiring of women or the full-time employment are formulated as our criteria. And finally, the gender training is the only clause that can be formulated as a performance condition, as an hour criterion, or as a capability criterion. It depends on the responsible person of the contract to decide which is the most appropriate, depending on the characteristics of the contract. If we go now to the inclusion process, well, we have resuming, we could distinguish four phases in the contract process. The most important one is the preparation phase, because it is here when we analyze the service, we define the purpose of the contract, and it's here when we realize which opportunities it offers in a matter of promoting gender equality. During the admission, we will have to check that offers fulfill the technical capability criteria in case we have defined that gender training as it's necessary, and also to check the exclusion grounds, especially the obligation to have an equality plan in companies with this legal obligation. During the tendering is the moment when we decide those criteria, if we want to formulate them as an hour criteria, performance conditions, or tie-break criteria. And finally, during the execution, we will have to monitor the compliance. And this is the most difficult part. In Spanish, I always say this is the black hole of the contract process. I'm not sure in English has exactly the same meaning, but this is the phase we have developed less tools to apply, although we have tried to develop some that we will see now. Let's go one by one. In the contract preparation, which is the most important, as I said, well, here you have a set of questions that can help to identify those opportunities. Like, for example, what needs are being addressed? Do they affect men and women in a different way? Are there specific inequalities in the sector target? What kind of workforce is required? With which qualifications, etc. When defining the contract purpose, remember that the relation with the criteria, it's important. So the title and description must explicitly state the inclusion of gender criteria. Here you have an example of a contract very far from social issues, like is the supply and installation of office furniture. So the title also remarks with gender responsible procurement required. And when defining the objective, we say to procure ergonomic, sustainable office furniture while promoting gender equality in the supplier's workforce and supply chain. It's a way to relate a social criteria, in this case, a gender equality criteria, with supply, which is really not connected. During the admission of offers, well, we will check if we have defined gender training as an essential required. We will have to check that all offers fulfill that condition. Here you have an example of this type of clause in Barcelona City Council. And again, checking the exclusion grounds, especially about companies with 50 or more employees that have the obligation to have an equality plan. During the tendering, again, here you have some examples of questions to decide if you want to reward offers, for example, that commit to hiring more women, include a higher percentage of full-time contracts, improve measures to support work-life balance, provide gender training for the staff delivering the service, etc. Or we want to ensure a minimum percentage of women hired, gender training for the staff, the implementation of measures to prevent harassment or measures to support work-life balance. Well, that's a decision we will have to take depending on the characteristics of the contract. And finally, in that last phase of monitoring the compliance, as I say, we don't have many effective tools to do it, but we have tried to develop some. And one of those is the fact that the standardized clauses are very detailed about the type of obligation, the documentation that has to be delivered, the period they have to do it, etc., in order to put the big part of the responsibility on the company, not as much on the city council, but also on the company. Something else that, well, it's in Spanish and probably too small to read it, but it's an interesting tool, is that all clauses have a protocol that it's systematically attached to the conditions, and this protocol goes even deeper in the details about what the company has to do, and it even offers an email address they can use in case they need advice. And finally, we have also designed a tool, in this case, not to help the company, but to help the contracting unity or authority, which is, it works as a checklist. It's very simple. And the idea is that in only one page, they find a summary of all the relevant information about the clause. Well, you can see the checklist remains them that the company has 10 days to present a declaration with and the documents, the necessary documents attached. And in case after those 10 days they haven't submit the documentation and neither have required this advice service, the promoting unit can initiate a penalty procedure. It's just a way to simplify information that it's divided in many different documents. And finally, I would like to show you some support resources we have developed for contracting units, authorities. The most interesting one is an advisory service, which is available at all stages of the process. We have also developed a specific section on the procurement website dedicated to social procurement, and it includes guides, models, patterns, etc. And every year, our public procurement office designs a plan which include all the updates and new clauses, new developments along the year. You can find all of them in this link. Although I'm afraid, and no one. Well, maybe the plan is in English, but I'm not sure. We have also developed some support resources for companies, and the most interesting one is this advice service, which offers up to 5 hours of free and personalized support to any organization based in the city. Sometimes not only based in the city, especially when we talk about contracts. They can be located in other places. It offers advice not only on public procurement, but on any issue related to gender equality and time management. It is provided through a cooperation agreement between the Directorate of Feminism, my directorate, and the Business Office Advice Office. So we put together our knowledge on gender equality and their experience on labor market. It's also a gateway to other type of resources and services like guides, training, etc. And obviously it includes support for the compliance with gender equality clauses. And just to end, I would like to remark the ones that I consider have been the key factors to succeed. The first one is that we have internal regulations since 2014, I think. Barcelona has a city council gender equity regulation, which details all the measures that have to be applied in order to ensure that all our activity has a gender perspective. And that document includes an article which specifically talks about the obligation to incorporate gender clauses in the council's procurement, concessions, and subsidies. It's also very important the fact that since the beginning, we counted with a strong leadership from the Department for the Coordination of Administrative Procurement. And finally, we put the stress in an intensive staff training. because as you can see, it's not a simple topic, and we consider that training was essential to ensure the correct application of this type of clauses. Well, here I finished the blog about public procurement. I don't know if you have any question or you prefer I go ahead with the grants and subsidies. Okay, go ahead then. Well, grants and subsidies is a much simpler topic, mainly because grants are part of what we consider activities of a general interest, which means that administrations have the power to decide almost everything about them. In fact, they are based on a very simple law with no more than 30 articles, which only regulates two aspects. The first one are the grounds for exclusion, which affect any organization which has discriminate has exercised any type of discrimination, including sex or gender-based discrimination. In Barcelona, we solved that by requiring to organizations to present a declaration confirming they have never been convicted to discrimination. And the second next aspect it regulates are the eligibility requirements, but only in the sense of remarking that the terms and conditions of the own grant call will have to define those eligibility requirements. That means that we are totally free to define requirements with a clear gender perspective, like, for example, grants or strictly oriented to women's organizations, or in the case of sports organizations, to those with a certain amount of federation license issued to women, or cultural organizations with gender balance programming, educational organizations offering gender training, etc. If we compare to procurement, there are two key differences. The first one is this possibility of regulating through the terms and conditions both the exclusion criteria and the eligibility conditions. And another one is that while in procurement, gender criteria have to be strictly related to the execution of the contract, in this case, in the case of grants, those criteria can also refer to the organization itself. So, for example, we can include the fact of having an equality plan or anti-harassment protocol, if they have a percentage of women in the workforce, if they have developed previous initiatives to promote gender equality, etc. That means matters that are not strictly connected to the project, but to the organization itself. Considering this legal framework, in Barcelona, we have developed a dual strategy. We apply a positive action, which consists on, well, we have a general call for subsidies, which include 15 different categories, and there is a specific one called Women, which is addressed only to those organizations working on reducing poverty and precariousness among women, or on gender violence, care or prevention, or in the defense and promotion of women's rights. On the other hand, we apply a transversal criterion. That's why we talk about dual strategy, which means that all those categories, those 15 categories, share a gender criterion, which allow organizations to obtain a maximum of the 4% of the total score. That score can be they can get that score in two different ways, which are complementary. If they apply gender perspective into the organization operations, which must be reflected in its articles or founding principles, etc., or by applying gender perspective into the proposed project. Can be through the methodology, content, objectives, etc. How can they verify that they deserve this score? In the case of the organization, they can submit their founding principles, for example, if they clearly show a commitment to gender equality. Sometimes they can submit activity reports that show they have developed previous projects within equality-focused projects, or any other document that proves that they promote gender equality in the organizational structure, like such as equality plans, rules to ensure gender parity in decision-making bodies, harassment prevention protocols, etc. In the case of the project, they can show they include the gender perspective in terms of context by the project objectives, concrete activities, target population, or the values the project promotes, or in terms of methodology, like, for example, incorporating women's voice in the design of the project, collecting data disaggregated by sex, considering gender-specific factors, or including gender-sensitive indicators. Something which is not a minor issue is the application form, the design of the application form. When we decide to apply this transversal criteria, we also include an specific part inside the application form to allow the organization to explain why they think they deserve the score, both about the organization and about the project. The goal obviously has to do with simplifying the task to the evaluators, but also because this criteria acts as an incentive. And we think it is important that organizations get used to think about it and to learn to explain how they promote gender equality in their activities. Well, considering we have 15 different categories, it's not easy to offer common criteria, but in general terms, we consider that our organization effectively integrates a gender perspective when they describe specific measures, like, for example, a commitment to maintain gender parity within the management team, or a protocol to ensure inclusive communication, internal equality plans, or to support work-life balance, um, for example, offering gender training to the staff, etc. On the other hand, we don't give the score to those organizations that consider that the feminization of the organization by itself means that they are applying a gender perspective, or that make a neutral approach, like, well, we often find statements like, we focus on people, or we treat everybody the same. Well, sentences that show they don't really understand the meaning of a gender perspective, and show that probably they are perpetuating inequalities, or the lack of detail with sentences like, this is a very important issue for us, we always take gender into account. Well, we consider that this type of lack of detail explanations don't deserve any score. As for the project, in a similar way, what we expect is that they are concrete enough, explaining the objectives or actions they develop. Like, for example, the project has been co-designed with a local women's association. We will provide childcare service during the participatory activities, defining a set of indicators to measure the specific impact on women, or, for example, creating an hour to recognize women's contributions in a male-dominated sector. While we consider doesn't deserve the score those projects that consider that the fact that most beneficiaries are women, well, once it is simply because the project targets to a female sector. When they take neutral approaches, this is not a sector where gender has any relevance, or things like this. And again, the lack of detail. Like, sometimes we find sentences like, oh, we always incorporate gender perspective in our activities, but they don't explain how, so they don't deserve the score. As the scoring criteria, they are indicative, since it's very difficult as well to be very concrete about this, but we recommended the highest score in the case of organizations and projects that develop structural measures, like, for example, having an equality plan in the case of an organization, or including a gender perspective across all phases of the project. We recommend a medium score in the case of relevant measures, like specific actions that have a clear impact on the organization or the project. We recommend a low score in the case of they develop basic measures, which are specific but have a limited or not so significant impact on the final outcome. And finally, we recommend to appreciate the effort of some organizations to apply formal measures like using an inclusive language when describing the project, or making a general reference to gender without the specific actions with a minimum score. And just to end, I also want to show you the support resources we have developed. We have designed a guide together with the two other departments which lead transversal criteria, who are the eco-social perspective and intercultural perspective. It is a guide which offers orientations to both evaluators and organizations. And also, just when the general call opens, we always organize 2 or 3 informative sessions, which are open to everybody, explaining those criteria and also to solve any possible doubt or question they can have. And that's all from me. I will stop sharing now and will be glad to answer any question you have. I was very fast in order to compensate the 5 minutes I lost at the beginning. So maybe you have some question or something I was not so explicit.
You did a fantastic job, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
So if anybody has questions or doubts, is the moment for sharing. This is super relevant for us because most of us here, we work in the public sector, so we can advocate for the implementation of this criteria. It's true that some of our institutions don't offer as many services contracts as a city council can offer, but we can advocate for these commitments in the SMEs. And this is one of the WEMEX goals at the end, no? To promote the presence of women in the SMEs of our partners, especially in management positions. I would like Laura to mention the key actions that we have to have in our institutions. No, you mentioned for the implementation of these commitments. You mentioned robust internal regulations in these issues, good leadership, and the staff training. I think it's
to us,
very. Go on.
To us, that was the key. The fact of having regulations makes in a way, makes that this type of measures are not vulnerable to political changes in a way, and that's fundamental. The second one is the leadership, not from the gender or the social related departments, but from the public procurement department. That's fundamental as well, because they have the power to really go ahead with with the subject. And training, it's fundamental, because you can see that, theory, it's more or less easy, but applying, how to apply a clause, how to formulate it, it's not an easy matter, and we offer constantly training and advice to the procurement, to the units, to the contract units.
And I don't know exactly the case of the other organizations, but I know the case of Basque Trade and Investment of Esprit. Ellie, you always mention that you have leadership with a strong commitment in this issue. Is that right, Ellie?
Yeah, we do. But thank you, Laura, for the presentation. It's very useful to have like a very specific examples of how to include. And I think we still need to work on this to improve our tenders, because we do have some clauses regarding the inclusive language and general things, but we do have to think to include more clauses to award some points or to actions with more impact. So I think this helps us to have real examples to do it and to revise what we do and improve it. Thank you.
Well, I have to say that the more impact they have, the more difficult they are to apply, because well, we are afraid if we don't do it in the right way, in the proper way, it can be really problematic, and that's why, well, inclusive communication, it's not a problem, but when you talk about hiring women, you have to justify it very well. You need knowledge on gender equality, knowledge on labor market, and well, you have to be very sure of what you are doing. So we try to do it, but still we have to work a lot.
Okay, if there are not more questions or comments, we can finish. We would like to encourage our partners to propose more webinars like this one in an online format. This could focus on stakeholders' best practices, those you may not plan to present during your local events. These webinars could generate learning for all of us, and they could also take the form of interviews with women entrepreneurs or export managers, or can be thematics webinars by professionals in gender perspective or in international trade. And from our side, we will share Laura's presentation and upload the video in the website of WOMEX, and I think is all. Laura, thank you very much again for your intervention, your presentation. We always learn a lot from you and from the expertise of the Barcelona City Council.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so see you in Poland and WOMEX partner, and thanks a million for those of you who are not part of the project and you are here with us attending this webinar. Thank you very much. Bye bye.